And so everybody, thanks for putting in your name and your organization in the chat box so we can all see who's here. And also, it's really interesting to see the different words that folks have written about what you think of when you think of grants. That's great. Compelling is a good one. That's great. So I think I'll get started. Let me admit there's a few more people just joining, and I'll admit people as they come along. So I want to welcome you to the Science and Art of Grant Writing. I'm Ann Lezak. I have been grant writing for so many years since I moved to Vermont. Oh gosh, it's been almost several decades now. And I have been teaching grant writing for many years. Often it's to other kinds of organization, whether it be arts, libraries, human resources. I did do a grant writing workshop some time ago for the Vermont Lakes Association, which I really enjoyed. And I am just delighted that the Lake Champlain Basin Program has invited me. It's fantastic. So thanks for having me. And I especially want to, I just want to get a couple thank yous out of the way. I really want to thank my partner in crime, Lauren Jeunesse from Lake Champlain Basin Program. She has introduced me to the ins and outs of all your the many grant programs, and helped me kind of zero in on what you needed and what you want, and has also done a lot of logistics, just coordinating with everybody to make sure that this workshop is really relevant to all three organizations that are participating. The New York and Vermont DEC, as long as Lake Champlain Basin Program, all the folks who might be applying to any of your programs. And that's a lot of grant programs I've learned in my time looking through. And then I just want to thank our little committee also. We had Meg from Lake Champlain Basin Program, Meg Modley. We had Lauren Townley and Julie Berlinski from New York, and Marley, thank you very much, from Vermont DEC. And together they helped me really make this real, because what I wanted to do was make sure that we used examples that are from your programs. I think that makes it much more useful for you. And so they helped me dig out the right kinds of examples and what works and that sort of thing. So without further ado, we are going to get started. No, let me just tell you a couple of things. If you have a couple logistics things. I have an awful lot to share with you today. And the way I like to do this is really, it's probably the most basic teacher rubric that early new teachers learn, and I find it works for me. I tell, so I explain, what a concept is. I show, I give examples, and then we do. And sure enough, we are going to do today. So I have we have a little small group work we're going to do. And for those who, I hope many of you can stay later, we're going to follow up and do a little more small group work, because I found that once we've talked about it, actually working on some of this is really helpful. So, oops, I just lost all of you. Sorry about that. Where did it go? I'm back. All right. So I don't have a lot of time for questions.
And
Yes.
I just want to confirm that no one else is in the waiting room as of right now.
I don't see anyone else in the waiting room, and I'm still looking.
Okay, I just sent a few last minute emails with the login instructions.
Here's one right now. So we're up to 41 people, which is fantastic. This is a really great group, and I'm really glad to have all of you. So
and the webinar is recording, correct, on your end?
Yes.
And if everyone could mute themselves and turn off their videos, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time for questions, but if you do have a question that is burning, go ahead and put it in the chat box. If I don't notice it, then Lauren will alert me. I will also ask a couple of questions, and the best way is if people answer those in the chat box. We are going to have a lot of time for question and answers in the Thursday session. In fact, that's a lot of what that's devoted to. So hopefully many of you can join that Thursday session and get your questions answered there. But if you have a burning question or I'm unclear, then I want to make sure that you do understand. So go ahead and put it in the chat box. If I'm too focused on this, then Lauren will let you in. I mean, Lauren will let me know. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to just go over the, oh, first of all, I do have a first question. I want to see if any of you know what lake I've pictured there. It's not Lake Champlain, hint, hint, hint. It's my favorite lake in all the Lake Champlain basin, because I am very fortunate that my husband and I actually have a little house on this lake. And I spent the weekend there, and it certainly makes me appreciate all the work that you do all the more. If anybody has a guess as to what lake this is, go ahead and put it in the chat box. We'll see if anyone comes up with the right one, and I'll tell you later. Okay, moving on. What are we going to talk about today? The basic tenets of strong proposal writing. What does it really take for everybody? This is my general kind of, this is what works. And I have to tell you, for the 15 or so years that I've been teaching grant writing, each time I think we don't even need one of these, I am asked to review a proposal and I say, nope, we still need to include these. So we'll do some of those basic tenets. We're going to talk about the all-important piece of project development, and talk about goals, outcomes, outputs, and tasks. And one of the many confusing things about grant writing is different funders call things different by different terms. And I've already been alerted, and you'll see in some of my slides, outcomes is objectives for, I think, New York and maybe even Vermont, and outputs is performance measures. So that's just part of what you have to put in your brain when you're figuring this out. We're going to talk about creating cogent project summaries, and we're going to do some budget guidance. And these are based on some of the issues that specifically folks who both write the RFPs and review the grants have said these are areas where they really would like me to give guidance. I understand that we have a tremendous range of folks, from people who might never have written a grant up to some of you who could probably be teaching this workshop. So I am aware of that, and I'm really trying to make it, user friendly for everybody. And I hope that you can all learn something from this. So moving on. All right. Basic ingredients. So again, as I said, each time I think I don't have to go over each of these, I read a grant or someone talks to me about it, and I find that yes, we really need to touch on each of these. So let's start with demonstrate project fit with the funder's mission and goals, and paint a compelling picture. What I always say, and I'll probably say it several times throughout this workshop, is that the funder is the king and queen. It doesn't really matter what you want to do if it doesn't match with the funder. You can be extremely passionate and have a fabulous project, a great idea, a huge need, but if it doesn't match with what the funder wants to do, then it doesn't really matter. So your first job is to really make sure that you understand what it is that they want. And that means really carefully looking over every part of the RFP. And because we know that past performance is the best predictor of the future, it's really helpful to be able to look at what this funder has funded in the past. And I absolutely love that the Lake Champlain Basin Program has an amazing resource where you can actually look at their past grants and you can see what kind of projects got funded and even at what budget for all the different kinds of grants. And to me, you would be doing yourself a big disservice if you didn't look at that. Another thing is, because the Lake Champlain Basin Program has created the Opportunities for Action document, that to me is a tremendous guide, and it tells you in each of the areas that they fund what it is they care about, what are they looking for outcomes. And that is just, really to me gold, because many funders don't provide that sort of thing. So again, it's so important that what you do, I find it's surprising how hard this is for people, because of course you're very excited about whatever it is that you care about, that your focus is. And so I think often we tend to say, well, it's not a perfect fit, but it's close enough. And I want to tell you, I approach every proposal. I used to write proposals as what I call a ghost grant writer. So I would be hired by someone, and then I'd have to learn their project. And I thought it was actually very useful, because I didn't already buy into the program. They had to convince me and show me why it really not only mattered, but fit with the funder. And I think sometimes it's just too easy for us to say, well, we sort of fit and they really should fund us because we so need the money. But I'm telling you, if you don't match, then don't apply for that one. And that has been one of my secrets to getting funded, is I never apply for grants where I don't think it's a great fit. Always keep the grant selection criteria and the reviewer in mind. Most of the grants that you're going to apply to, not all of them, but most of them are going to have not only the piece, the RFP part where it asks you to talk about personnel and your project activities and your objectives and your outputs and tasks, but they also provide grant selection criteria. And that is incredibly important. And in fact, I'm just going to share an example here from the 2019 Best Management Practices Lake Champlain Basin Program announcement, which is one of their larger programs. And I'm going to just share a few of the evaluation criteria, because I'm telling you, when I used to write grants, and I worked on some very, very big federal grants. In fact, the largest was a $7.2 million grant to redo Vermont's children's mental health system. So I've worked on all the way from, very, very large ones to $10,000 for the Vermont Women's Fund. But whatever it is, whatever size, I always say that I do everything but sleep with these criteria under my pillow, because the beauty of the program, most of the programs you're applying to, is they tell you exactly what's important. So let me just share a couple of these. This is from, again, the Best Management Practices for Pollution Reduction, Implementation and Planning Grants from 2019. And there are two kinds of grants. There are the implementation ones, which are $50,000 to $125,000. And then there are planning grants, $50,000. Technical merit and applicability of the proposed product toward the priority objectives identified in this RFP, 20 points. That speaks exactly to what I was talking about, that it matches applicability toward the priority objectives. So you have to have lived and breathed and really get those and understand them, so that you're making sure that what I go back and forth all the time as I'm writing, as I'm drafting, from what I understand the funder to want to what it is that we want to do. And I make sure that those are a really good match, because if they're not, you're not going to get those points. So technical merit, another one is demonstrated ability to accomplish the deliverables. So, and that's 10 points. And I look at what I first do when I'm going to write a grant is I'll put these, and I'll put how many points each one, and I'll just constantly, as I'm writing, be, writing into these to make sure that I have met those criteria. And if it's 20 points, then I'm probably going to spend 20% of my writing on that area. If it's 10 points, it's a little less. So demonstrated ability to accomplish the deliverables. So that speaks to things like, what's your experience? What kind of staff do you have? What kind of planning have you done? Do you have all your, is everything in place? Have you shown that you're ready to hit the ground running? Do you have your letters of commitment? clarity, conciseness, and adherence to the proposal guidelines, 10 points. To me, that should be just a natural that everybody does. But the fact that they have to put this here shows me that not everybody does that, because you get 10 points for doing something that to me is a no-brainer, that you are going to be clear, concise, and follow the proposal guidelines exactly. So woe unto you if you don't do that. You're going to lose 10 points right off the top. And then appropriateness of the budget and budget justification, describing how the funds awarded will be used. So you want to show in your budget that everything you've thought of is really a great match, and that you're not in any way, that it really matches with the deliverables, and that nobody can look at your proposal and say, why are they spending this? Or I don't understand how this fits. So those are the kind of things that you want here. I think I'll just give one more example. It's interesting that in category A projects, which is 50,000 to 125,000, there are 20 points for the demonstrated need. And in the category B projects, which are planning, 30 points for the need. So that is a very big extent of your grant. And you would be making a tremendous mistake if you didn't spend close to a third of what you're preparing, showing that there is a really great need for this, and showing that you have done your homework, and that you're, that this is something that is really going to make a difference. Part of showing that need is going to be how you develop your goals, your outcomes or objectives, and your tasks. So that feeds right into this, and we'll talk about that. This one, follow the proposal format provided, responding to each requirement in the order given. This is the one that I always want to take out, and then I have to put it back in, because it's just amazing to me that people don't do this. To me, your job is to make the king and queen's job, which are who are the reviewers, as easy as possible. And in fact, it's interesting. I was talking to one of the team who was helping me prepare, and they said that often one of their challenges is that people will, the grantees, the proposers, will have all of the information, but they make the reviewers hunt for it. It's not in the order. It's not put as they've requested. And that is the last thing you want to do. So even if it doesn't make sense to you, even if it, I mean, when I used to write these huge federal grants, I honestly used to say that I felt like somebody would take the almost finished RFP, go to the top of the stairs, throw it down the stairs, and then just put it back in any weird shape or order. Because often it would start with things that just didn't make sense to me. It might start with target population, and then you might have to go, and then maybe experience of the team, and then activities, and you might not get to project need till fourth. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that they're asking, in whatever order they ask it, that is to me part of the brain stretching of grant writing, is to make sure that you are answering in the way that they ask, in the order that they ask. So I write my outline, and I'm telling you, sometimes, let's say I only have a very small space for, well, target population often overlaps with project need. So I often write maybe project need first, and then I end up moving some of it into target population. But you just want to really make sure that you're very strict about following that order. And again, this is another one I shouldn't have to say, accuracy counts. But those of you who've written grants, I think you will appreciate, or at least for me, the proposal is not done until the deadline is there. I wonder if some of you agree with that. I always thought it was amazing when I talked to people who would say, well, what I want to do is I want to get the proposal done a week beforehand so everybody can review it and look at it and make sure it's right. I have never done that in my life. In fact, the very worst one I did was, it was an $850,000 grant for, it was for the state of Vermont, and the printer broke. One of the good printer broke, and we ended up, it was awful. We ended up having to drive to a UPS office from Waterbury. We had to drive to a UPS office in Burlington, and we had 2 cars go with 2 different sets in case it broke down. So I am a last minute type of person. And yet I know that I have to be accurate. And I know that I am too close to it to do that. So what I do is I will dole out pieces of it and ask people to look over different pieces. And here's how you can really go wrong easily with accuracy. There's a couple ways. One is, in my case, a lot of the grants that I wrote would have quite a few personnel, and we might decide halfway through the writing process that the project manager should really be called project coordinator. Well, if we don't go back and make sure that we've changed that in the budget and we've changed that in the personnel section, then the narrative is going to read one title and the rest is going to be another title, and that is a disaster. Clearly, another place this really matters, and you folks do a lot more of counting and providing, number of acres and number of pounds, and you put a lot, there's a lot of that. And it certainly is true that as you're developing your grant, you go back and forth and you decide, you know what, we're not going to do this much, we're going to clear out this many acres, and it's changed from before. And woe unto you if you forget, to check that. And I just want to warn you from my personal experience that as the main writer, if you're the main writer, and if you work like I do, you will end up too close to it to catch all that. So even if you're a last minute type of person like I am, you need somebody while you're revising some other section, have them make sure that that budget exactly, precisely matches up with what you've said in the narrative. And then of course, as you change budget numbers, many, many times we would add up, and again, ours were very personnel heavy. So we'd say, oh, we can't afford 2 people. We can only, do 1.5 FTEs. Well, that would change the whole budget. So, and this was in the days before Excel. So, we had to make sure that everything we did, we had to go back and check. So again, that is just a really important part. Oh, I lost you. What happened to there we are. Okay. Oh, I'm a little ahead of myself here. Okay, let me go back. All right, so any burning questions here? Or we'll go on. We're going to get into the details here, okay?
We're good for questions right now, but remember, if you have a question, please type it into the chat box.
Great. Okay, we're going to move right into developing your project idea. And I think it's really important to spend some real time on what it is we're going to be doing as far as what will be different when we're done. And that is really, to me, that's what your funders are looking for. And that's what I urge people to think about. It's not like we're doing this to accomplish all these different tasks and get all these things done. The reason that we're going to get funded is because we are going to show from the beginning, from our overall project goal and purpose, that we are accomplishing something that when it's done, we're going to really show a difference. And so we want to be able to come up with one, I always say, even if a funder says, what are your goals? I always start with an overall or our overarching project and goal. And I really see grants in kind of as a pyramid. At the very top is our overall project goal and purpose. It's the exciting, kind of dramatic change that we're going to make. Obviously, it's much, much smaller for a $10,000 project than it is for $100,000 project or $1 million project. But remember, if it's a $10,000 project, you're still competing against all those other $10,000 projects. So you still need to show that with that $10,000, there is going to be a difference that matters. And I think that you really water it down. And I've also served, to me, some of my best experience has been serving on the other side as a reviewer, and you really learn what works and what doesn't work. You really water it down if you say we have these 4 or 5 goals, because that means if you have 4 or 5 goals, then there's going to be outcomes for each of those goals. And then for each of those outcomes, there's going to be tasks, and you've lost me and you've lost all the other reviewers before you know it. And it's also, to me, it really forces you to think very logically and clearly. If you can, and it's worth it to spend some time. And often the first project goal and purpose that I come up with isn't necessarily the final one. Now, in some cases, for some of your project, it's very, very clear. You're going to build something, or you're going to, remove invasive species. For small projects, it's very clear. So I guess I'm really probably talking about the bigger ones. But even for small ones, I saw one that it was removal of invasive species, and they tried to dress it up. They put too many ornaments on it. They made it like a Christmas tree. And it wasn't a big grant. It was maybe for $15,000. And I kind of lost sight of what the real goal is. So keep in mind, if it's a fairly small grant, it's fine for you to just do this one thing that is very, very much needed, as long as you can explain that this is the project need and this is what you're going to accomplish. That is also true sometimes for very large projects. Some of you have some very large construction projects that do one thing, but it makes a tremendous difference to water quality, for example. And so as long as you can explain that this is the need, that's absolutely fine. So again, I see it as a pyramid. At the top is your overarching or one project goal and purpose. And it should be something that people really look at and they get it and they say, aha, I follow it, and now I want to know more. And when you read that goal and purpose, me, the reader or the reviewer, should be able to tell from that goal something about what will be different once you are done. And then you move to your outcomes, also known as objectives. And this is what people really get hung up on, I find, is the difference between tasks and outcomes. And I can do it too. And this is how I used to start my when I was hired as a ghost grant writer. I would meet with people, and let's say, I'll just make it up. Let's say it was a gardening program for, I'm making this up, but a gardening program for school-aged children. And I would meet with the folks who wanted me to write the grant. And I'd say, okay, what's your overall purpose and goal? And let's say they decide the overall purpose and goal is to, again, I'm making this up, so it's not gonna be great, but to connect children with their food and have them be excited about being part of the process, the growing process. And then you talk about what are the outcomes, and people start talking about lots of different outcomes or objectives. They're going to learn how to grow a garden. They're going to learn to eat healthier. They're going to be exposed to different kinds of foods. They're going to learn cooperation. They're going to be outside and get exercise. You can come up with many. And what we need to do at that point is to then come up with what of these rise to the level of outcomes. They're big enough that, as I write here, they are measurable. They're measurable sets of activities and strategies that together will achieve the goal or purpose. They're the results or the effects of all the activities. So each of the outcomes, even though they're very much interrelated, they each kind of need to stand on their own so that there will be a set of activities, there'll be tasks that have to be performed, that when those are done, you will be able to look at this and say, we have an outcome. Here's an outcome or we have met this objective. So for example, if exercise is something that people that folks say might be, you know, the purpose of a grant like this, that might not be at the level of an objective or outcome. That might fit under there. That part of this is the kid, you know, one task is that kids will get outside and go gardening 3 times a week. And so they'll get out and get exercise. But that might fit into a bigger outcome of children experiencing the outdoors as a, you know, someplace that they really love and feel at home in. So this takes some really hard thinking work, and it really is where I think people get stuck the most. And it's not something that is, it does take some work. And we're going to find out, we're going to do a very quick exercise today. So it's just going to be a quick draft, but you know, I want you to understand when we do it, of course, it's nothing like the final, but it will show you when you force yourself to be thinking at that outcome or objective level, that it really helps you. It's that higher level. And how many outcomes or objectives should you have? Well, I don't care if it's a $2 million project or a $10,000 project. In my mind, there's some projects that are so small they only have one, and you folks have some projects like that, but I would never have more than 4. So I think that you need to, no matter how big your project is, and now, you know, maybe it's a project that both has a historic piece, it involves volunteers, it's also, you know, really cleaning up some area that is historic. Maybe there's going to be signage, maybe there's going to be trails. You could come up with so many different objectives, but your goal, your job will be to say which are the kind of higher level ones that will achieve the goal and purpose, and that are the result or effects of all the activities, and which ones are at the task level. And so I challenge you to make sure that you really come up with 1 to 4 outcomes or objectives. If you have more, then chances are you're a little confused and you haven't really thought through your project well enough to be able to hit the ground running, because it's going to be very hard, especially with a larger project, to be working on 5, 6, 7 outcomes at once. And I can 100% guarantee you that you're going to be confusing your reviewers because they can't keep track of all that. So let's look at some examples here. Okay, this is a real example that one of our wonderful team members sent me, and I have hidden the for each of these I've hidden the actual project name, and I've also, partly because I've done a little bit of rewriting. So go ahead and read this, everybody. I'm gonna give you a minute. I'm going to show you projects of every different size. Oh, sorry about that. I just lost you. What happened here? Okay, all right. I'm going to show you projects of every different size. I just want to check. I almost think there's someone in the waiting room. Let me just make sure there's not. No, I don't think so. Okay, fine. All right. And so I started with a big one, but it doesn't matter. You're going to see that really almost the same criteria apply no matter how large it is. So I went ahead, I started, this is absolutely on one of the very larger sizes of projects that are funded. And yet there are 2 objectives. That's how many objectives there are for this $921,000 grant. And that's because there's really 2 major parts. And it's interesting, they said, I mean, I thought it was interesting, and I understand why they did this. It said establish riparian corridor and place signage. Those are a little bit different, but this is such a big project that it would be crazy and silly to have objective 3 be place signage. So that makes a lot of sense. And apparently, I don't know your projects well enough, but apparently that's important enough that they wanted to make sure that, you know, people saw that as kind of one of the higher level outcomes of this, that people would know about it, that it would be very public. So I think that's a fine approach to put that right in the outcome or objective number 2, even though, of course, it's really just a task. So you need to decide, especially if you're doing a large grant like this, what needs to be in those 1 to, you know, if you have a large one like this, chances are you're going to have more than one objective or outcome. But what needs to be right up front so the funders will see that we really know what matters here. Now, this is interesting because established riparian corridor is something that is funded quite a bit, and it's a really important piece of all the work, or a lot of the work you folks do. And we see that in some cases, that could be a very small grant. It could be a $20,000 grant. And yet this is much, much bigger. And part of that, of course, is acquiring the conservation easements. But for a large grant, you're probably going to find that the tasks are not going to be quite as specific as for a small grant. If you're just establishing a riparian corridor in a small area, then you're going to get quite specific with your tasks about, you know, who you're going to use, volunteer training, you know, scheduling the days. If you're doing something that's much bigger, your tasks are probably going to encompass several different more activities. And then the outputs, there'll be several outputs under each task. But we're not to that point yet. So any questions here about what we're talking about with outcomes and objectives?
And I was just about to reply to a question within the chat,
Okay.
but you do, the question is are objectives and outcomes identical?
I put both of those words because I know that Lake Champlain Basin Program uses outcomes, and I received, and from the grants I looked at from New York for sure, and maybe from Vermont, I can't remember, they use objective interchangeably with outcome. And I have to tell you that in many grants I write, I talk about objectives. The way I often do it is I start with my grant proposal. I start with the goal, and then I have my usually 3 to 4 objectives, and then I use outcomes in the evaluation piece. So, you know, it varies, but I put both outcome and objective here because yes, they're interchangeable depending on the grant. That's a really important question because you absolutely don't want to use the word objective unless that's what the funder uses. And you don't want to use the word outcome unless that's what the funder uses, at least as when it comes to, you know, what comes after your goal and purpose. You can certainly use that word when you're talking about, you know, just describing your project. But when you're listing these, you need to use exactly what the funder does. And there may be others besides outcome and objectives that I haven't even seen. But that's a good question. Okay, moving. Okay, moving on. All right. Let's just look at some more examples of goals and outcomes because I think it really helps to see what these look like. And I wanted to show you one where there's only one outcome because it's a very clear project. So read this, it's short, I'll read it. Reduce amount of stormwater entering Lake George from X locale for $63,000. And they had one clear outcome or objective, which we can really understand when we read this. There's no reason to mess it up and complicate it by saying, oh, I have to have 3 objectives. They're going to replace asphalt, stormwater, swales with erosion control products and infiltration basins. And that's what this money is for. And so they've made it very clear from the start is now we're going to look for a very clear plan that, we're going to be looking for the outputs of what's going to happen. Well, these are going to be replaced, and there's going to be erosion control products and infiltration basins. And this applicant is going to show us that they know exactly how to do this, what it costs, and how they're going to get there. One objective. Let's look at a different kind of project, a small one. Improve water quality and restore riparian habitat throughout Sunlight City's parks. And it's a small budget. And remember, it's just for the parks. This is for a small city. And in fact, I can tell you it's a city of 10,000 or under. So you could certainly have this same project for $150,000 for a much larger city. But in this case, there's probably just a few little parks. And these outcomes are what they're setting themselves up. I guess that's the other thing you have to realize. When you are working on an outcome, you're actually setting yourself up to prove, you're going to have to prove that you're actually going to do these things. So even though it's not all that much money, it's a small project. You're saying here that you're going at the end of this, and this is what I mean when I said with your goal and with your outcomes, you're really setting up for the reviewers to understand and see the picture of what's going to be different when you're done. And that's a beautiful thing. But, don't overpromise. I mean, this is a pretty big promise. They're going to stabilize stream and river banks, remove and replace invasive plants, and reduce sediment and erosion. Now, it's nice that, these words don't promise how much they're going to do for all these, but they'd better clearly spell that out. And they'd better show us that even though this is a small project with $15,000, if they can't show through the activities that they describe that they're going to make some significant progress in each of these, then they don't deserve the money. Then they kind of overpromised, and they think they can do more than they could with that little amount of money. So that's up to you, and you need to really think as you plan your project and describe your outcomes, and then move to what your outputs are going to be. How much are you going to do for this amount of money? That they're very reasonable. What I always say is, when people ask me how do you decide how much to do, I always say you want to be realistically optimistic and optimistically realistic. So you absolutely don't want to overpromise such that you're going to be left at the end holding the bag and not being able to do most of what you've committed to. But again, I do a lot of, my grant work is with maybe human service agencies and people. And so if you say, for example, that you're going to serve, let's just say let's say in one of your projects you use volunteers, and you say that you're going to use 30 volunteers, and your output is that 30 volunteers are participated in this project, and 28 volunteers participate. That's not really a problem, is it? I mean, we know that maybe 2 of them got sick. But if you say that you're going to use 30 volunteers and 7 come, then you've got yourself a problem. So that is really part of your thinking through process, is that you want to promise enough that it looks really good and you're going to get the money, but you do not want to overpromise. And that's something that you really need to plan ahead. Okay, moving on. All right. So now we are to the point where I'm going to put you to work. So everybody take a minute to read this. Oh, maybe I'll read it. I guess I'll read it since I'm going to put you to work on it. All right. So this is actually another real project. I want to tell you, if you actually worked on this project, Don't cheat. Don't, you'll have to sit back a little. But actually, no, go ahead and read this, everybody. Let me give you a couple minutes. Okay, let me read just the purpose and goal again. So this is $26,000 for 1-year project. The purpose or goal is to produce plans to reduce stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion on the lakeshore in the town of X in order to mitigate nutrient pollution in this area of Lake Champlain. So it's a planning project. And what I'm going to do now, and you'll be amazed how well this works. I am not saying that you should be developing your actual outcomes and objectives in 20 minutes, but I often use this sort of brainstorming session, and I find it's really helpful when we're starting out on a project. I get the people in the room who are involved in some way, and in this case, you're going to be a random group of people who have different kinds of expertise and different experience to bring to this, but you'll find it works. You'll all be able to help out, and I hope you'll all participate. And in only 20 minutes, I'm going to have you come up with what you think would be the outcomes or objectives for this project. Two draft outcomes. And I want to tell you that this is an actual project, and it actually did have 2 outcomes or objectives. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and there'll be 4 to 6 of you in each breakout room. About 5 is what I'm aiming for. And what I'd like you to do is to both unmute yourself and show your video so you can see each other. And then what I'd like you to do is choose someone who is going to be the scribe, who will, be able to present these, who will write these, and then somebody else who would be able to present them. We're only going to have time to present from 2 or 3 of the groups. So think about, whether you're ready to present. But it's amazing what you can come up with in a short amount of time, which we understand is a rough draft. So don't get hung up over, wordsmithing at this point and that sort of thing. But really think about, again, what is the larger picture here? We already know what it, we've given some background. We know that we want to reduce stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion. I mean, we know we want to produce plans. So what are 2 outcomes that a reviewer can look and say, this looks like a real project that they've, know what they're doing? And again, it's just an exercise, and I don't expect it to be polished or finished. Do I have any questions? And then what will happen is that when you're done, the time will expire and you'll be popped back. And I may pop in to your groups just to say hello and just make sure if there's any, see how things are going. Any questions before we start on this little exercise, which I assure you will be quick and fun and exciting, and really, I hope everybody participates. Even if you haven't had experience with this, I think once you hear what people say, you'll be able to help, because I'm going to just say one more thing about this. The reviewers are not necessarily experts on each of these kinds of projects. They know something about them. They have experience in erosion prevention and that sort of thing, but you have to write your whole grant, your whole proposal in plain, clear English, so that a regular, a regular person from your agency or your organization, because that's the kind of people who serve on these review committees, would be able to understand it and realize the importance of it. All right, so I'm just going to give you a chance one more time to see if there's any questions before we launch into this exercise. And if you have one, you can chat. And otherwise, I'm going to put you into your breakout rooms. I just realized in your breakout rooms, it just hit me a logistic question. Somebody is going to have to answer this, because will you be able to read this when you're in your breakout room? Will you be able to also, I can't remember if you'll be able to see my screen.
So Anne, I did copy the text of the slide into the
Thank you.
chat.
Thank you.
So if
Okay, thank you
most
very much.
people copy it just quickly onto their computers,
Yeah,
we'll
that's what
probably have at least one person in each group with the text
okay, I just
handy.
realized that's, I thought of everything, but that just hit me. So I'm going to give you just another minute to copy and paste this. All right, and again, no matter what level you are and whether you're new or you've been here for a while or you're with an agency or you've written grants or haven't, you should be able to participate and help each other. So you're going to have 20 minutes to do this, and I'm going to put you in the breakout rooms. Hopefully this will work well. Okay, we're going to go into 6 times 5. 7 times 5. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, everybody, have fun. Welcome back, everyone. Are you all back? Everybody?
We can hear you, yep.
Okay,
Yep,
good.
it looks like a lot of people.
Okay, and can you see my screen that says draft project outcomes?
No.
No, we can't.
Okay, for some reason I'm not sharing. So, all right. Think about whether you want to be one of the couple that gets to share this, and I'll figure out why I'm not sharing my screen. And let me do that. All right. Whoops. Let me get back to it. Okay. Now do you see it? I think
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, what I'd like now is for, we had 7 groups and you did a lot of work in a really short time. I was very impressed. And I have to say that I think just about everybody kind of got to where, the start of where we needed to be. It was really interesting hearing your discussion. I'd like to have 2 brave groups, your recorder, agree to share your project outcome. And if you can write in the chat box, and then Lauren, if you can call on that person, whoever it is. We'll do the first 2. And I'd like to hear your 2 outcomes, and then we'll talk about them for a minute.
We have volunteers from Julie Berlinski and then Allison Adams.
Okay.
Thank you. So Julie.
If you can, I'll write it. If you can say it slowly, what's your first outcome?
Okay. So our first one was to identify the worst spots of erosion and stormwater runoff in the town through an active community engagement process. So that includes residents, professionals, public works, just involving the entire community in the process.
Who did you list? Who were some of the people?
Oh, sorry.
Works,
Residents, shoreline landowners, professionals, public works.
Okay, good. All right.
Yep. And then our second one was to develop mitigation strategies. for stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion.
Oops, sorry, just a
Oh,
second.
sorry. Yeah.
Having-
Take your time.
I'm having a little issue here. Why isn't that working? Okay.
Cool.
All right, what's the second one?
Okay, so to develop mitigation strategies for stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion using experts and other resources to determine approaches and BMPs.
Okay. Too fast for me.
Sorry,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Develop mitigation strategies for shorewater runoff
And shoreline erosion.
Yep.
Using experts and other resources to determine to determine approaches and BMPs.
which you all know are best management practices. Okay, good.
For nutrient reduction. That was the last part.
Okay, fine.
I
That's
wanted to sneak that in there.
That's good. That's good. I think that's smart. That's good.
So
Okay.
it's stormwater reduction.
Oh,
That
stormwater reduction. Oh,
Yeah.
not nutrient reduction. Stormwater reduction?
Is it?
Is it stormwater reduction?
I think instead of shore water runoff,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
is Paige, is that what you mean? That
Yeah,
it's
at the
shore-
first
that
line
was-
Shoreline.
should be
shoreline
stormwater. Nope,
Stormwater,
stormwater
stormwater.
runoff.
Yeah, because that's what's in the, okay, that's good. You were using the words that are in the thing. Okay. All right, so that's one. And our next one we'll call A.
And Allison, are you still ready to share?
Yep, absolutely.
Remember to talk slow.
Sure,
Yeah.
that's a good reminder, especially for me. So ours are probably not actually that different at their core. So our first one was gather and present information on existing conditions and data available regarding erosion and runoff in this area in some number of stakeholder meetings that would be specified. But
Okay, read it again slowly.
Sure.
Starting with conditions,
Yep.
existing conditions.
existing conditions and data available regarding erosion and runoff in this area in X number of stakeholder meetings. We would pick a number, but didn't for the
Runoff.
purposes of this.
And runoff in this area
Yeah, in some number of stakeholder meetings.
in X, yeah, which you'll decide before.
Right. And we didn't specifically outline the stakeholders, but I think that's a great idea. We did mention homeowners, so residents, landowners, absolutely. And I think some of those other suggestions are great too. And then the second one was conduct an assessment by trained engineers, and probably should say and other professionals, to identify potential courses of action and produce a ranked list of, we said 4 potential plans.
To identify
Potential courses of action.
courses of action and produce a rank list.
Of, we said 4 potential plans, but that was a random number.
Okay, I think that this is really great. You did an excellent job. And I also think it's helpful to look at what you can produce in only 20 minutes and then what we can learn from this, what's working and what's not. And that's what I'm going to ask you now to do. And Lauren, if you can help me again. If you would like, well, actually, I guess you could do raise hand too. I guess most of you know how to do raise hand, which is fine. I would like somebody to tell me what is good, what works about this first one. What do you like about it? What's something really positive as a reviewer?
Public engagement.
Public engagement. It's involving the community and they're reaching out. That's a really good thing. And it's interesting that that both of these pick public engagement, stakeholder meetings and active community engagement. What else works about this first one? Either of the two or together.
I think use of the terms that are in the project goals are rolled into both, I think 1 and 2.
Yeah, the stormwater runoff and the shoreline erosion. Yeah.
In the chat, we have that it echoes back to the purpose and goal of the proposal.
Yep. That's very good. And both of these, I want to say what they've done, which is exactly what the successful proposal did, is if you, oh, excuse me, if you're not talking now, you should probably mute everybody. I always have to remind everyone that. What's great is part one, and I think every group came up with this, is an assessment of, kind of a general assessment. And then part two focuses in more on what you might do. And in many cases, identifying specific projects, or in this first case, mitigation strategies. Who wants to tell us what could be stronger about number one? Remember, everyone, we're all in this together. You only had 20 minutes. We want to really talk about what makes these very strong. So what could make, I think both of these are really impressive for a start, but they can always be better. What could be stronger about the first one? Anybody?
I think it could include a field assessment.
That's exactly my feeling. An active community engagement process is part of it, but I think we really want the experts to go look at it and do some of that work. I agree with that. Anything else that could be make this even stronger?
In the chat, we have the first one has two parts: identify the problem and do community engagement. Those seems like two outcomes.
No, I don't think so. I don't agree. I think that the active community engagement is how you're identifying the spots. So I think that's fine, because as I told a couple of the groups had started out just by saying that we're going to identify the worst spots. And I said, you want to show right up front, because this is a competitive process, that you actually have a plan, that you have a process in mind. So no, I think this is the strategy that this group has chosen to identify those worst spots. And I think it's important to tell that they've thought through how to do it. So I think that's good. And I do think that adding a field assessment would really strengthen this. Is there something else that could be stronger about this first one, either the first or the second? And again, we're all, all of us, don't take any offense. This is really strong stuff, but you had 20 minutes.
We have a few people in the chat talking about if it's appropriate to add in the cost estimates within outcomes.
No, not here. No. That's going to come quite a bit later. Nope. And what I did like is almost every group I heard talking about the fact that it's $26,000 and what does that mean? You have to really keep in mind as you design your project, how much can we do given this much money and the size of our town and the kind of problem that we know there is. So I think it's really important, but no, you wouldn't put cost estimates here. That's too specific. Is there anything else about this one that could make it stronger? I really like the developing the mitigation strategies. I'm going to give you a minute and then I'm going to say, I think there's one thing missing here.
Within the chat, we have a suggestion to add how we would prioritize the areas.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
that's
precisely it.
we had it written down and I skipped past it. So we were talking about it.
Can you see how that's missing? Now
Yes.
that you
Oh,
see
Yeah.
that?
definitely. Yeah. I just forgot to say it.
Yeah.
And
And so what would be wonderful is to say, you might not even develop these mitigation strategies in this planning process for these particular projects, because this is just a planning process. You might, it might be focused more on identifying your top offenders, the top choices. And I do think that a strength is to come up with a number. I'm going to, jump to this second one now. I think saying a ranked list of 4 is a really good idea. And then, I do think it is important then to talk about the mitigation strategies, but don't start with that. Start with assess, the priority projects. And I want to tell you that what was interesting is I think the actual project, and there's someone on this call who was in that project, I don't think they even identified which projects they were going to operate the plans on in this. I think they had a list of like 6 priority ones. And that's what this whole $26,000 went to. And then they were going to figure out which ones they were going to do after that. I can't quite remember, but I think that would be okay. All right, the second one. So I do think, I think you do some beautiful, in the second, I just want to go back to the first one for a minute. I think in number 2, you really show and you tell what you're going to do. Using experts and other resources to determine approaches and best management practices for nutrient reduction. And as other people said, you kind of repeat what the purpose is so we don't forget and we know you haven't forgotten. I think that's very nice. All right, what is strong about the second one that we got? Let's take a second and read that. Well, let me read it. Gather and present information on existing conditions and data available regarding erosion and runoff in this area in X number of stakeholder meetings. And then conduct an assessment by trained engineers to identify potential courses of action and produce a rank list of 4 potential plans. What's strong about this? What do we like about it? Somebody either chat or speak up, or forever hold your peace.
We have in the chat that using available data is a strong point of this one.
Yep. Gather and present information on existing conditions and data available. Yep, that is really good. We're going to already look at what do we know now. And we're going to gather that through bringing these different stakeholders together, apparently. What else is strong about either A or B here? Somebody else, since we're not all talking at once, someone can just chime in, that's fine.
Use of trained experts.
You mean the trained engineers?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a duh, like we know that's going to happen, but you can see by saying trained engineers, that elevates this somehow. If you just said, listen, if you didn't have that, conduct an assessment to identify potential courses of action. You're right. By not having that, it would substantially weaken this. And you have to decide, and again, you only had 20 minutes. Is there anyone else who's going to do this assessment? Is it just trained engineers, or are there other experts that we use? And that would be what I would be talking, if you had hired me, I would say, okay, is there anyone else who should be in this assessment, or are trained engineers what we need entirely? And you can see how that strengthens it. Just as you folks in the first one talked about, you had different stakeholders that you identified. When you get to the assessment, we want to talk about who's going to do this. Yeah. And in the first one, you said using experts and other resources. I think that's a good start, but I would probably hone in and really show us that you know who those experts are. That, are they trained engineers? Are they trained engineers and somebody else? What's another strength of this one? Is there another one before we move on to what could be better even? Well, I already told you what I thought was a real strength, is that we're going to produce a ranked list of 4 potential plans. To me, you've gotten very specific there. Instead of just saying, we're going to conduct an assessment and come up with some priority, some priority projects, the closer you can get to identifying. And if you don't know 4, if you don't know it's going to be 4, if there are many options, it's absolutely fine to say a ranked list of 4 to 6 projects or 4 to 6 potential plans. And you can understand, it gives you some leeway, it gives you some, kind of room to move. And no one among the reviewers is going to say, well, they have to tell us exactly the number. Do you see why saying 4 to 6 would also be fine? And that would give you a little wiggle room there. Is there anything else now let's talk about how could we make this second one stronger? Is there something else, something that's missing or we could add or we could strengthen to make this better? Somebody speak up.
What you're ranking them, like how you're ranking them based on maybe nutrient loading.
That's a good idea. The more specific, I mean, it's funny. It's like it's a funny balance, because I was just going to say the more specific you can get, the better. And that is in some ways true, but we also have to step back and remember that this is an outcome. And so we don't want to get too specific. And that's why I said you're not going to tell things like talk about cost. But I do think, and you can see how in this first one, best management practices for nutrient reduction, I think that's a really strong statement. And I agree. We go back to what we want to remind the reviewer that we know what it is our focus is for this very particular project. I think that's a good idea. Anything else?
I was just going to say, building off of that, just using, some of the buzzwords from the RFP and sneaking those in there a little bit more.
Yeah, which I think this first one did a good job in. I think you could sneak them in a little more. What I tend to do is I put a lot of those buzzwords in and I overwrite and I end up with this long curly sentence. And then my job is, with the help of the experts, is to shave it down and get it very sharp and clear. And yet it still really resonates with what the reviewers are looking for. So I think you can do that. I have one more way I would strengthen this. And again, I'm not really an expert, but let's pretend I'm a reviewer. So in A, you're going to gather and present information on existing conditions in stakeholder meetings. That's the only way you're gathering the information. To me, I think that's important, but I also think there might be other, I don't think just stakeholder meetings is going to do it. And I guess that brings me back to what you folks in the other group said, is that you also want to do a field assessment. Does that make sense? The stakeholder meetings are important, but they're probably not going to be the end all and be all. And so you really want to think about, what are you going to need to do to really come up with these, kind of the highest priorities. And stakeholder meetings, I think, is part of it. But to me, I would think there would be something more. And what does someone else think about that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Does anyone else want to say, like, is this kind of similar to what some of the rest of you came up with? Did anyone come up with something that was completely different? Or to me, what I wanted to see and what I did see, I think, throughout, and what the winning proposal had, was two pieces. One is, we're going to have some kind of assessment process to come up with possible projects, or where the need is. We're going to identify the need through an assessment process. And then second, we're going to come up with a plan to prioritize and choose who's going to, who really needs this. What are the highest needs locations?
The
And
comment I would have,
yeah,
looking at the two, A and B, would be to try and tie these two objectives together by adding, for instance, in B, using the data gathered in the stakeholder meetings, conduct an assessment by trained engineers. That would give some input from the
I think that's a nice idea. It shows that the progression, that you need one to get to two. I think that's a really nice idea. Use the data we have found to do X, Y, and Z. I really like that. Okay, we are going to move on, and excellent job. That was really nice. So I'm going to move back into my slideshow. And we're moving on to tasks and outputs, another place people get mixed up. One thing I want to say is, you don't want to, this is hard. How can I say this as an expert? You don't want too many tasks. You don't want too few tasks. You want just the right number of tasks. That's easy to say, but hard to do. And again, stepping back, you want, and it's actually I said tasks and outputs, but I want to start by talking about outputs because that's really what defines your tasks. What you want to do is you go from your outcomes or your objectives to how are you going to show you attain those objectives? What are the material, concrete, numeric, measurable ways that the funder and you and your community and the world are going to know that you actually achieved and made progress and spent our money well? And that is really the outputs. And so I put tasks first because that's the way all of the RFPs read as far as what you have to talk about. But when I'm working with someone, I would first talk about what is it that we're going to show for ourselves? What is it that we want to have be the outcome of this? Not the outcomes, but the measurable results that contribute together to achieving the outcome. So we start with the number of volunteers trained, and the task is develop a volunteer training series. Number of boats cleaned. We create a boat cleaning protocol and schedule. Square footage of area from which plants are removed. The task is remove woody invasive plants. But we really want to focus on, what is it that we want to get? We want to get a signed contract with a successful bidder, conduct a bidding process, construction job completed. That's a great output. The task is to oversee the phases of the construction project. And I intentionally put quite a few different kinds of tasks and outputs here because you have in your projects, many of them have several, or they may not, but within the RFPs there are all of these kinds. And once you know what your outputs are, and again, how many volunteers are you going to train, how many boats are you going to clean in your AIS project in your pond or lake, you're going to be optimistically realistic and realistically optimistic. So you're probably not going to reach that 100%, or you probably underbid, but you better not be that far away. Let's just talk for a minute. And Lauren, if you can look in the chat for me. Okay. If you have a Lakewise project or lake greeter program, one task and one output is the number of boats cleaned. And one task that contributes to that output is to create a boat cleaning protocol and schedule. Could somebody write what might be another task or two? If you could write that in the chat box, and Lauren, you can read them. So we're talking about a lake greeter program or a AIS an invasive species program at a lakeside. What's another output you would like to see? And what's a task to go along with that?
We have a hire greeter, which is the boat steward.
Okay, so that's the task. And
We have train greeters.
Yeah, I think you could put that up here. You could say develop and implement a volunteer training series. So I would put that in one. I would make that one task. Develop and carry out, and that's a good addition.
I would see a task as develop an information program, and the output is 20 information signs showing invasive species in this area.
Fantastic. And then I'm going to okay, anybody else? We have time for one more, and then I'm going to tell you one.
We have in the chat, unless someone else wants to shout out. So we have decrease the ratio of boats with AIS compared to total boats inspected, and develop messaging for public.
Fantastic. And it was developing messaging for public that I was going to talk about, because I just happen to have a daughter who was one of those greeters, and a lot of what she did was give out. So one task was develop an information pamphlet to give voters, and then an output would be number of pamphlets given to voters. It was like a one pager, something like that. So, okay, and great. So you can see outputs are directly, clearly related to the task. Or to put another way, in the task, your output should be no less and no more than what you said it would here. So if you're saying oversee phases of construction project, construction job completed, that's a perfectly reasonable output. You don't want to put anything else there that would kind of take away from that. So you just want to be as clean and clear so we can understand what your tasks are. And like I said, you don't want to get too specific. And I think that was a really good example that someone said. When I said develop a volunteer training series, you could conceivably have another task that said, train volunteers. But you and I all know that this is like a kind of a small project. It's not something that people go for 4 months of training, right? It's only in the summer. So I would, once I thought of that task, I would say, oh, let's combine those. That makes sense. Let's say develop and carry out a volunteer training series, and that would make this stronger. Any questions about this? I guess let me just say one more thing. You can see that these are very specific sets of activities that are quite different from the outcomes. The outcomes are broader and require usually a couple of tasks, and not always, but they don't always have a couple of outputs, but they often do. Whereas these are very specific things that we carry out to get measurable outcomes. And again, you occasionally have small projects or very focused projects. Maybe they wouldn't even be small, they just cost a lot. But for example, I saw one that was building a salt shed in a town. Okay, they had really one overall, overarching goal, which was to build the salt shed. Their objective was to build a salt shed, and then they explained why, so that they could do a better job of, I don't know, caring for the roads or whatever. And then I felt that, and then, so they only had one outcome, and then they had several tasks, which makes sense, that related to, getting the contractor, starting the job, overseeing the job, ensuring that it's done, by all the right laws and regulations, and then completing it and getting it certified or whatever. So it really depends on what the project is, but what you want to do here is you don't want to overwhelm your reviewers with, oh my God, there's so much here that they're talking about, but you do want your reviewers to understand that you know what it takes to do this job. And so you are going to give, and that their money is well spent, that we're going to have this many boats clean, that we've already decided how much area the plant's going to be removed from. And that we know that, it's a simple output, signed contract with successful bidder. I want to say, in addition to outputs, there are also, I forgot what they're called, Lauren, but there's reports that you folks have to give, and that is similar to outputs, but they're, you also have to put them in the outputs, but it's called something different. But it's like the beginning, the quarterly report and the final report. So those are deliverables. That's the word. So most of these grants also have deliverables, and those are also kind of concrete. Like we've checked off all these things that we needed to do. We've shown that we've met the criteria, and a lot of it is reporting. So those are called deliverables, and they're just a different kind of output, and they're a report. Any questions there? Yes.
Would you be able to check the waiting room? I think
Oh,
at least one person got bumped
oh,
off. and needs to
yes,
be-
thank you very much. I see we have someone in the waiting room. Thank you very much. And sorry about that, keeping you waiting, waiter, but you're here now. Good. Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Okay, tasks and outputs. Here's, I'm just giving you an example here. And again, this is a real project. So, and I will share this with you afterwards, but go ahead and read it and you can see how this all fit, how the tasks and the outputs fit together and attain an objective, an outcome of objective.
Hey, this is Paige. I have lost your screen completely. I can see your face and all the other, the thumb,
Uh-oh, that's not good.
but I can't see your screen, and I don't know what I did wrong, but
I'll
I'll just listen.
I am, can other people see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
I
Laura,
don't-
I'm not sure how I can do that. I can't
Yes.
see. I'm not
Okay.
sure I can help. I wish I could.
Paige, I'm gonna type in Ryan Mitchell's information, who will be able to help you if you can't figure it out. I'll type his email into the chat.
Well, I have to figure out how to get to the chat. Somehow I lost everything except for the thumbnails and the audio.
Not good. All right. So I'm gonna carry on as we do this, and I hope we get you back, Paige. Hopefully people had time to read this, and I just am sharing this as an example. And what I like is that there are, several different kind of tasks here and several different kind of outputs. And you can see that some of them are simply, we know, how do you know this is done? How do you know you've achieved this? And I also like that when they did the harvesting, there are several different measures, which I think is a real strength. And actually, in talking to some of our team, they said that's often something they see is that people will only put one measure, and that's not enough. What else do we need to see? What are those performance measures? What are those outputs? How will we know that you actually conducted the harvesting? We want to know how many pounds, the number of hours you spent at the area of harvest, and the percent of AIS cover. That's a really nice measure. And then we have a completely different kind of measure, which is the outreach. Now, if you were doing, look at this number 4, conduct outreach via social media and local media press releases. All right, this is really easy to achieve because all you're providing is the social media and press releases. If your whole project was a public information and outreach project, you would be held to a much higher standard for this. And it wouldn't be enough to talk about social media and press releases. Your outputs and performance measures would have to be results that you've seen. And that means you would have to show that, you've gotten this many clicks, or that this many people, brought others to your page, or that people stayed this, there's all these measures of social media success. And you would be, you would need to do that because this is just a small piece of this project. It's enough to just show that you've actually done the social media and press releases. And that's all the funder really wants to know, that you've done that. Is that clear? Any questions about this before we move on? Okay. Putting it all together. I'm going to go through this quickly. You create one overarching purpose or goal that responds to your needs and directly lines up with the RFP. And the opportunities for action is just such a wonderful resource to go back to again and again. It has all the language. It has a lot of what you need to really make sure that you're fitting with what at least Lake Champlain Basin Program wants. And I think it really aligns pretty darn well with New York and Vermont DEC in many cases too. And then you want 1 to 3 outcomes or objectives to achieve the goal. I think I said 4. Yeah, so it's usually 1 to 3, but in an outlier there could be 4. I probably should have written 4 there. And that's really saying what will, so that when I read that as a reviewer, because remember, I'm going to read that early on, I can say right then, by looking at your outcomes objectives, oh, these folks know what they're talking about. These folks get what it takes to fully carry out this project, to realize this goal. They're going to be using our money well, as long as they can show that once they've developed these, they have the outputs that we need and the task that makes, the task to produce those outputs, the reasonable tasks. So then you determine how you're going to measure or demonstrate your achievement. And you're going to have 1 to 4 outputs per outcome. And again, these are often called performance measures in some other grants. You're going to design your tasks around those outputs. And even if it's not required, and most grants do require this, I strongly recommend you use a table to lay out your outcomes objectives, the tasks to achieve those, the outputs and the deliverables or performance measures, whatever the word is, and crucially a timeline, because I want to know as the reviewer that you've actually thought through when you're going to do this and what it takes. And if you're using an inordinate amount of time and haven't left yourself, in the preparation phase and haven't left yourself enough time for implementation, that's going to show in that timeline. Also, even if this isn't required, it's an excellent planning tool. I strongly, strongly urge you to start at the beginning as you're developing your project to use a table and to start playing around with, okay, if we get this task done in March, is that going to give us enough time to finish the project in June? Maybe we need to finish it in February. Or maybe this output is too much. Maybe we shouldn't say we're going to do 20 acres. Maybe we really can only do 15 acres. And seeing it all together here, I think is really helpful. And now I'm going to briefly touch on your project summary and abstract. We don't want it tied up in knots like the 2 pencils there. We want it clear, cogent, and concise. All right, I want to tell you, I've now looked at a bunch of these sample projects, and I see why this is on here. Because what is that project summary and abstract supposed to do? It's supposed to do what one of you, and I can't remember your name, was talking about when you were talking about maybe adding to the project objective to really, kind of flesh in why are we doing this? That's what I want to know from the project summary or abstract. It's a tangible statement of why this project matters and what will be achieved through this accomplishment. But that's not enough. You have to do that really quickly because you only have a very short amount of space. Some of these projects, you may be asking for $50,000, $80,000 and you only have a paragraph to do this in. So you'd better really get that sharp and clear, because you absolutely want your readers right up front to see that you have a very clear and compelling goal, outcomes to achieve that goal. And then you want to show your key outputs, not everyone like contract signed, but that you are going to have, identified for priority projects. And then, outputs are that here are the things that we're going to be able to tell you about those projects. We have looked into cost, number of homeowners affected, or whatever it is. So you want to make sure this is really like your resume for a job interview. It's the public face of your project, and as someone on the team told me, this is something that you would want in a press release. When Lake Champlain Basin Project funds your project, this is something that you can, this kind of gives the public the face of what this is. So it really is, in addition to the public face of your project, it really is your calling card. It's how you're going to really show that you know what you're doing. And it's going to it's so important because it's going to get your readers from the beginning to really say, oh, this is a strong project, or scratch their head and said, well, I think I get it, but I don't quite. After they read that project summary and abstract, and I go back and rework it time and time again as we get sharper and more clear about what we're going to do. That's one of the last things I finish up is that project summary and abstract, so that we're very, very clear. Okay. Budget. Every funder has different budgets, but these are very typical items. And in fact, I took this from one of the Lake Champlain Basin Program projects that has a lot of funding. And the only one I added was equipment. I'm sorry, equipment. Because on larger projects, you often have equipment. So let's just go through these very quickly because, time is speeding by. Whoops, let me just go back there. Sorry about that. I went ahead. All right. I have these divided into task 1, task 2, and task 3. That's because that's the way Lake Champlain Basin Program does it. Guess what? If that's not the way your funder does it, and if they want you to do it a different way, as I've seen some of the Vermont and New York projects do, then you're going to do it that way. And so this is, this can be a brain tester because again, you need to make sure that you're explaining this in a way that's very, very clear and that they understand what it's for. What I saw a strong project in the, I think it was the Vermont projects do, under personnel, they listed each person and what tasks they were working on. So I thought that was a good idea. You might not have room to do it here. You might do it in budget justification. That's fine. But you do want to do, so each of these personnel, your fringe is usually, that's a set amount. Travel, it's usually a best estimate. You don't know exactly, but again, optimistically realistic, realistically optimistic. Equipment and supplies, the difference is equipment is kind of fixed things that you buy and continue to, they're there. And like, I don't know, things that a computer or furniture or some kind of tractor or a vehicle. Supplies are things that you use up generally. Paper, seeds, hoses, things like that. Contractual, a lot of your projects do have contracts and they have professionals who you're contracting with. So you need to divide that up. And then that's called the total direct. And it's very, very important. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't include an indirect if you're allowed to. But you're also making a really big mistake if you include indirect and you're not allowed to. And I want to tell you, that is incumbent on you because I already saw a couple of these that said indirect is not allowed. I saw others that said you can charge 10% indirect. Indirect is for all the things that go into your carrying out this project that don't appear on paper. It's your office. Remember back when we used to have offices? It's supplies it's the equipment that you're not buying for this, like, the printer or whatever. It's insurance and all those sort of things that just, that are part of running business. And so that's 10%. And then you come up with a total budget. Match is a sticky issue. And I strongly advise you to actually call the funder if you have any questions, if it's not 100% clear. Most projects, almost every project, you can do match. There are projects that require match. And if you don't meet that match, if it requires a 10% match and you give a 9% match, then you either lose a lot of points or you might not even be considered. So make sure that you're very, very clear and your math is right. Then there are plenty of projects where match can be included, but it doesn't have to be. And I always advise people to include some match, whether it be some volunteer work or somebody is loaning a piece of equipment or somebody is loaning some space for meeting. Again, back when we used to meet, include that as match. I was saying this to the little team I was working with, and one of the folks from one of the states said, oh, we tell people exactly what's required for match. Because often when I'm working with these small organizations, I say you can have a party at the end and that can count for match. But no, a lot of these projects, your party wouldn't count for match, celebrating completion of your project. So this is a place where I think it's really important to check in with your project people, and they're on the RFP and they're there because they want to make sure that you do the right thing. And so if you have questions about match and how much you should do, and whether something qualifies as match, and what rate you can charge. I saw in some of these, it actually shows what the rate you can charge for volunteers is, what the rate you can charge for mileage. You want to get that all perfectly right. And then I'm saying do your math because I have absolutely been there where we're at the very end. And there was one project we ended up staying till 2 a.m. because we realized someone made a math mistake. We were on the verge of putting it in at 8 that night, and that math mistake just sent everything off. And you don't want to do that. So be very, very clear. And a very important part of you, are there questions? Okay, if you see any,
In the,
yes.
yep, in the chat, if I am writing a grant to pay for our 2 divers for 8 weeks on our dash boat, what category would workers' compensation insurance and basic insurance fall into?
I believe that that would be in fringe because they're personnel. And if they're your personnel, then it's in fringe. So that, you know, it's not their salary. It's not what you're paying them per hour. The only other thing is, oh, sorry, if they're contractual, then you just put it all in. And, you know, if they're hired on contract, you don't have, you know, you could put that in the budget justification, but usually you wouldn't. You would just say 8 divers times 6 weeks times X amount, and you would include both their salary and fringe in that. Does that answer the question? Okay. All right, any other questions? Don't neglect your budget justification. This is a really nice example. I'm going to give you a minute to read it. Again, from a real project. The only thing I would do different in this is if I had space under personnel, I would do this as a bulleted list. It's much, much easier to read, but it may be that they do it this way because they only have a certain amount of space. But I like, you know, if you can see, a bulleted list is much better if you have that option. And then the only other change is you can see under professional services, they wrote biological consultant, and they said what task it's for. I think it would be really great, even though you've done things by task earlier, to show here what I would probably put what tasks each of these personnel are, except for maybe the executive. No, I mean, they show work plan review. I mean, they're telling, so it is by task. So I would probably, it would just make it much easier for me as a reviewer to go back and see, even though they're saying like the research associate has many different functions here and roles. I would like to see probably something, you know, just says T1, T2, T4, so that we know. But you can see a budget justification, and this is where a lot of people fall down. You have this nice budget, but if you don't really explain what you're using it for, then it's not that helpful. We have to guess as reviewers, and we don't want to guess. We want to know. And this to me shows that you've figured it out, that you've really thought through. Why do we need who and for how many hours? And so it's really, it strengthens, you can see it strengthens the proposal. And you don't have to know everything. Look, travel approximately 1,380 miles. And that's the best we can do. And even if some of these hours are a little off, it's going to be okay. But you do have to really, you know, to me, this shows that you've really focused in and figured out how many, how many hours is it going to take to do this task and who's going to be doing it. And you can go back and say, you know what, we found out that the research associate really, we don't need that person quite as much. What we really need is that a few more hours of that science and stewardship director. You would never do that without asking, and you would never do it without having a reason. But it's very important to be specific here and then know that if things change that are unforeseen, you can go back and often renegotiate something, not major, but small like that. And any questions on the budget justification? Or budget questions? This is, I want to say one other thing about budget. Don't wait till the end. Your budget should be developed in line with, as you're developing those outputs, and you say, we're going to clear this many acres, we're going to clean this many boats, we're going to train this many volunteers, you should have that budget right there and say, well, what's that going to cost, so that you're not scrambling at the end trying to figure it out. And it's going to really show and help you develop your project if you do that.
And I was working with the Lake Champlain Basin Program, this is Paige, Basin Program grant last year, and I had some discrepancies between which tasks funds were spent on, and they were big discrepancies, although the total budget stayed the same. And I renegotiated the contract with, they provided a new contract for me with Neipwick and Lake Champlain Basin Program, because of those discrepancies, but you have to go through that process.
I am glad you brought that up,
And that
because
worked.
you do not want to try to hide that or wait till the last minute, do you? That wouldn't go over well.
Right. If it looks like your budget is not meeting what your budget proposal said you were going to do, you need to talk to them.
Absolutely.
It was a fine process. It was a lot of paperwork, but hey, if they're going to give me money, I'll do whatever paperwork they need.
And I always say, put yourself in the position of the funder. And that's all you have to do. They're a reasonable person. And you can go to them and say, oh my God, once we got into this, we realized that what we really need is a lot more of planting. And the harvesting is actually not that bad. And so we need to, switch over. And if you show them, they will understand that they want to get the best product, but you cannot do it after the fact or the day before you're going to do your harvesting and all of a sudden say, oh, whoops, we just wanted to let you know that budget tripled. So very good point. And all you can really do at this point is your very best guess, but you do not want to say, we can't figure it out, so let's, so if in personnel here, they just had listed the people and didn't know how many hours, even though you don't really, at the beginning of a project, let's say it's a, $40,000 project. You don't know exactly how many hours it's going to take your science and stewardship director. You can only give your best estimate, but woe unto you if you don't do that, because this show, this is you can see this budget justification to me as a reviewer says, oh my God, these people have really thought through what it takes. And they're not just saying that they're having a research associate for, this much time and providing this much match, which shows that they actually, have really made a commitment, but they've thought through, what is each person going to do to contribute. So it really, gives you a very nice sense. And, down to the grass seeds, seed spreader, tree tubes. You could say workshop supplies, but look, they even told you they're going to buy tree tags. They've really thought it through. So obviously for a huge project that is, $180,000 project, and you're going to do it, you might not get down to this level. It might be workshop supplies because you're doing 40 workshops, but you might, really put yourself in the reviewer's chair and say, what would help them understand that we really know what we're doing here and we've thought this through. Okay, we have time. I'm going to go back almost to the beginning when we started. And I want to ask you, are there parts of this that you have questions about in our final 5 minutes? Are there some general questions that anyone would like to ask at this point? And while you're thinking about that, I just want to say that I'm going to do an ad for my next piece, which is we're going to do another working together project, which again, as I said, and I hope you saw, when you actually work on one of these in a team, you really put what I'm telling you to practice. And I really was very impressed with what all the groups came up with. And you know, went through some real process talking about what does it mean? What do we want to put into this outcome? And so now we're going to do the same for a task. And we're actually going to be working on the same project. And I'm going to pick some version in the 50 minutes that I have off of what you folks provided. And we'll work on one of those outcomes or objectives and actually come up with tasks for it, which I think will be really helpful. Okay, any final questions, comments, ideas, thoughts? And again, I hope I'll be seeing a lot of you on Thursday also, when we'll actually be having a lot of input from the real experts, which are the folks who write the RFPs, review your grants, and fund you and oversee them.
Hey, Anne,
Yeah.
I have a quick question or comment. As recipients take on their project tasks, it's awesome when the funder receives some clear quality photos with their quarterly reports, because it allows us to co-promote what you're doing in the field. So if you happen to take some for your own social media, please consider passing it along to your funder as well. Thank you.
Nice idea. And that's only going to endear you to your funder.
Yes, thanks, Colleen. And there's one last question I'm seeing
Great.
in the chat.
And actually, we're still early, I realize. So we have, so we can take a couple questions. Yes.
Do you want me to read it out to you, or can you see the chat?
Oh, you know what? Somehow I lost my chat. Where is it? Yeah, can you read it, please? And then everybody can hear.
The question is, how long should the background part of the grant proposal be? I feel like mine was too detailed about location of our lake. Should it address the problem area that we are trying to combat?
Okay, that's a good question. First of all, a lot of these are limited, and more funders are saying you only have a paragraph or you only have 2 paragraphs. But if you feel like it was too detailed, then I'm telling you it probably was. Put yourself in the funder's chair and understand that what they really want to know about and get to right away is what I talked about. Let's go back to when we talk about the public face, the tangible statement of why this project matters and what will be achieved. So you don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this is our lake and this is what it looks like. And you can presume that your funder knows something about it, unless, I mean, you know, if there's a part where you do want to talk about project need, so you absolutely want to use that space to talk about why this matters, but don't tell them general things that everybody already knows. Like, if everybody already knows that erosion is a problem in lakeside communities, you don't need to spend your time explaining that erosion is a problem in your lakeside community. You can presume that people know that. What and you can presume that it impacts boating and all that, in one quick sentence, you can kind of cover that. So you don't need to go into detail. So what you want to do pretty quickly is get to what it is that you're going to do to alleviate this problem and how will things be different. And I always think it helps to think that I'm in a competitive situation. And I need to be showing that my project is going to have more impact and be the most important project and going to be the one that is going to be the very best use of funds of any project. And so that's where I want to use my words. And I would really look at if I'm spending a lot of time describing it, are these things that our funder probably already knows, understanding who these funders are. That, I just want to say that that might be different if you're applying for a national grant and, you know, people from Kentucky, California, and Illinois are going to be on your review committee, and they think of Vermont as this pristine, beautiful, clean place, then you're going to have to do a little more work explaining why you know, pollution is an issue in Lake Champlain and what we need, or whatever lake you're working with, and what we need to do about it. But really think about your audience and really stick to these ideas. And you do want to, you know, quickly get to your purpose goal outcomes and what are the key outputs? What's the difference going to be? I hope that's a little helpful. Oh, and I just realized, speaking of lakes, I wonder if anybody guessed what lake I showed you at the beginning. Let me put it back up.
And we had a guess of Lake St. Catherine.
Nope. I want to say, I think there's someone on this, in this group who is involved in the, you know, lake program that oversees this lake. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll tell you.
Is it Lake Dunmore?
It is. It's Lake Dunmore. And that is a really great view that I got from a friend who took me on a hike way up, you know, the Silver Lake hike, and took me out on some cliffs when it wasn't the, you know, nesting season. And we were able to get this incredible picture. So yes, it's Lake Dunmore. All right. Any other questions before we have a break? And then those of you who are coming back, and I hope a bunch of you are, I know it's late in the day, but it'll be lively. It'll be quick. I promise. It'll go fast. And to, you know, really focus in on how we make tasks and outputs work with this. I will see you at, what time am I seeing them, Lauren?
We start back up at 3:45
Right.
for
So
session number 2.
yeah, so I think we're ready to stop now and say goodbye, and thank you very much.